What is the worst parenting trend? Story 1. When I was younger, my dad got pissed at me regularly for not having my room clean. It didn't matter if I had cleaned it already. It wasn't going to be clean enough for him, so I knew he was going to lose his mind over it sooner or later. He decided to wait until I got home from school, give me 15 minutes to deep clean my room, and then he'd take care of it. I could never get anything done over the 15 minutes, because I have been always too anxious about what came afterwards, and I spent the whole time every time trying not to hyperventilate and hiding my favorite possessions. When the kitchen timer went off, he would come into my room and rake everything into a pile, then throw away anything that he decided was dirty or out of place. If I tried to take something that was important to me out of the big black trash bag he had in there, he'd crush it and push the item to the bottom. One time in high school, he decided to do this to my room after not having done it for maybe a year. At the time I was really into stop motion, and I had been hand carving and sculpting using the clay in our yard for days. Gathering the clay was a lot of work. Sculpting was a lot of work. Baking the finished pieces in a broken household oven was a lot of work. So was sewing, painting, detailing, etc. It was all a lot of work. When he decided to do this, I had one of my scenes out that I had been working on, a scarecrow puppet in a small field with a crow. Since the only flat surface I was allowed to have was covered in clay being cleaned and homework, I had the scene carefully set aside on my floor. When he came into my room with the timer, I focused on gathering my clay up instead of picking up my finished pieces. He came in and wrecked my scene 15 minutes later. I managed to sneak the puppets out of the trash, but he threw me main scenery across the room and shattered some of my miniature crows I had made. This wasn't the first thing of mine he'd wrecked, but it was the first time he targeted my puppets. I waited for him to leave, then picked up the pieces and started reassembling the crows. He came in later and asked, "What are you doing?" with a relaxed smile on his face, and I told him I was fixing the crow he broke. He got mad and told me I was the one who broke it, since I left it on the floor and gave him no choice. I told him he was being ridiculous and that he should apologize for breaking something I had worked so hard on, and he laughed in my face and forced me to shut down the small studio I had set up in my room. I wasn't allowed to make puppets anymore. I'm still not. This is just one example, and my point is that breaking your children's belongings is absolutely vile. I have an intense fear of countdowns, timers, and alarms now, not to mention the fact that I haven't let my parents see any of my art projects while I'm at home in forever. It drives a wedge between you and your child every single time. If you're the type of person who breaks things to teach a lesson, I don't know what to tell you other than don't, because it's one of the stupidest, most cruel things you can do to someone who is supposed to be able to trust you. Do way better. Story 2. Removing doors when your kid asks for privacy. You just kind of prove why they want a door. When I was a kid, my parents would shout down the stairs when they wanted my brother or I to do something for them. So we always had to keep the door cracked or open so we could hear them. Although, typically, we were both under headphones on our computers most of the time. Oh boy, if you didn't come when they called. My dad threatened to remove the door multiple times. My mom and I got into a shouting match when I closed my door at 7:30 p.m. because she was shouting at me to do something, but I couldn't hear her. Thank that they learned to walk down the stairs and open the door like a normal person. Dad is decent enough to kinda knock while opening, mostly because knocking sets off the dog, and because I wouldn't be able to hear it. My mom never learned to knock, though. She'll barge into any room or, my favorite, open the door while knocking so you can't get upset at her for not knocking, especially when you're trying to use the bathroom. So basically, give your kids some privacy. Story 3. As a teenager, I absolutely hate how family members will spill private secrets and constantly complain and make jokes about you on the telephone or when families gather. Also responding to you in a very snotty attitude. I think that's a big reason I am insecure and have social anxiety. I remember when I told my dad initially about how I was depressed. He actually seemed to care. He hugged me and everything. despite the fact that he's a tiger parent, forcing me to do extra work on top of my homework and hitting me with a branch if I didn't or did it wrong, getting angry when I didn't understand something, calling me useless when I didn't do something right. Granted, I am an airhead at times, but it hurt, and it still does. A couple years later, my dad downplayed and joked about my depression when I was in high school to a couple of family friends that he had over. He probably thought I wouldn't notice since I was in another room and he was keeping a quiet voice. It felt like a huge violation of my privacy, and it broke the little trust I had left. I overheard it when I went to the kitchen to get my hot chocolate that I forgot earlier, and afterwards I felt so bad I didn't want to drink it anymore and poured it down the sink. I brought it up during an argument a few years after that, and of course the kind of person he is. He thinks he is never wrong and would rather try to win an argument because parents are always right, or disregard my side in things because I'm trying to rebel, and essentially downplayed why I had depression. Basically guilt-tripping me into thinking the reason I was depressed was my fault. Now every time he lectures me and brings up the topic of depression, he deflects blame and says, "Your generation is depressed because of technology, drugs, gaming, etc." rather than the fact that his way of parenting was emotionally abusive and gave me inferiority complexes, imposter syndrome, and low self-esteem. His initial words of comfort were just a lie. Don't tell people personal things about your child. And if you aren't genuine about the care of your child, you shouldn't have children in the first place. Story 4. Extremely strict rules in general. I had a childhood friend that came over after school once, and he said he had to be home by 6. Didn't think much of it, so we lost track of time playing games. He lived about a 10-minute walk up the street, and he noticed it was 5:52, then started freaking out. "My dad's gonna kill me if I'm late." I tried saying he wouldn't care about humans. The next day in school, my friend said he wasn't allowed over my house anymore, and I never hung out with him again, all over this kid being 2 minutes late getting home. Story 5. This was me. My parents never taught me to cook or bake. One time I was at my cousin's house when I was 12 or 13, and we were baking cookies. The recipe called for however many cups of brown sugar, and I didn't know that you were supposed to pack it. My cousin or my aunt, I don't remember, let me know to pack it, and it wasn't a big deal, and we made the cookies. Well, it must have come up in conversation. My aunt probably just mentioned it to my stepmom or something. But at some point after that, when I was home, I got screamed at for being so stupid that I didn't know how to pack brown sugar. Never mind that I wasn't allowed to use anything in the kitchen except the microwave, so not sure how I was supposed to know that. When I lived on my own, I obviously learned how to cook and bake by following recipes, but I was lacking in technique. My first year of marriage, my husband and I were cooking dinner, and I was chopping cilantro badly. My husband came over and very nicely showed me what to do, so I could chop correctly. I then had a meltdown because I was worried he thought I was too stupid to cook dinner. Yeah, having meltdowns over the slightest criticism is really fun for both me and my husband. Story 6. As a child, my parents did this to me, and I still to this day am embarrassed by my period and try to hide it. When I started, I told my mom, and she threw pads at me, and that was it. Never talked about it or anything. I also got a UTI when I was 14 and was so scared to tell my mom. I thought it was an STD even though I never had. That it got really bad, and I ended up in the hospital. And when I wanted to go on birth control at 18, I asked my mom about what I needed to do, and she rolled her eyes and told me she didn't want to talk about that, and don't ask her that. Like what the? I was trying to be responsible and not have kids at 18, ended up calling in near me and getting pills, but serious. Story 7. My wife and I are basically neighborhood pariahs because we allow our children to ride their bikes around our quiet, low-crime suburban town. I've had a parent flat out tell me he won't allow his son to come over without him because I might do something crazy like let them shoot hoops on the basketball net out front without standing there watching them. Children need a little bit of freedom. You can't be expected to make grown-up decisions when you never had the opportunity to make child decisions.